This message is directed towards the international truth community. The Dutch language holds a significant position as one of the oldest languages globally, boasting a rich and extensive history. Its presence can be traced to various corners of the world and is intertwined with ancient narratives. Despite making numerous unique discoveries and identifying correlations in my research, my presentations are primarily conducted in Dutch, rendering them challenging for the international audience to comprehend, albeit subtitles are readily available on platforms like YouTube. Would you prefer I make them more accessible to you? Hence, I propose to deliver this video in English. During this presentation, our primary objective will be to translate ancient Dutch quotations I've uncovered into modern English. We'll primarily focus on the oldest narratives depicting giants or Tartary and the prophesied end times. These references originate from sources like the Oer Linde book, historical chronicles from the Netherlands, Friesland, and Zeeland dating back to the 16th century, as well as Belgian history from the same period, alongside various other works, sometimes translated from Latin or Old Dutch. As an avid viewer of content within the international truth community, I'm confident I can contribute intriguing insights to the topics you often discuss. These Dutch quotations and insights offer a unique perspective that adds depth to the overall discourse, gradually forming a coherent narrative of past events. Let's embark on this captivating series. The language spoken during the era of the Tower of Babel stands as the oldest language known to humanity. It was once the universal language, spoken worldwide, often referred to as the good language, later evolving into the term God language, as documented in the Oer Linde book. The good or God language represents the original incarnation of Dutch or Frisian, providing the underlying explanation for the widespread presence of early Dutch influences in names of regions and peoples globally. Even amidst the most remote jungles, among indigenous populations, surnames such as Yudhet Kraaienest from the crow's nest can be found, bearing testament to this ancient linguistic heritage. Quote Oer Linde book. When Ralda, God, gave children to the mothers of the human race, he laid one language in all tongues and on all lips. This gift Ralda had given to the people, so that they might make themselves known to each other with it. Since our language paves the way to happiness and bliss, and thus also guards against the evil tendencies, therefore it is rightly called God language, the language of the good, and all those who hold it in honor have honor from it. But what happened? As soon as deceivers arose among our half-sisters and half-brothers, who called themselves servants of the good, that soon changed. The deceitful priests and the wicked princes, who always conspired together, wanted to live at will and act outside the laws of the good. But they have invented as many languages as there are states. As a result, one people can understand the other people as little as the cow the dog or the wolf the sheep. This the sailors can testify. But from there it has now come, that all slave peoples regard each other as other people, and that they must wage war and fight each other as a punishment for their recklessness and arrogance until they are all destroyed. End quote. What we encounter in the Oer Linde book, as well as in other historical texts, is a fundamental misrepresentation right from the outset, particularly through religious writings. These texts, given their profound influence, have inevitably been subject to manipulation by the same negative forces or dark powers throughout history. What we truly need to recognize and understand from religious scriptures is the existence of external influences, both benevolent and malevolent. We are evidently living in a period described in various religious texts as the end times. This can be termed the little season of Satan, wherein individuals residing on or within the earth are akin to the dead, resurrected in what is referred to as the second resurrection. We all anticipate a judgment upon our souls based on our actions and deeds. In my research exploring the science behind monopole physical properties, ultimately offering a scientific rationale, and delving into aspects such as the Earth's shifting magnetic field, I have also derived a prediction indicating a magnetic field reversal in 2025. The concealed history of the Netherlands unveils one of the most intriguing discoveries I've encountered while delving into Dutch history, a concealed era whose history has been discredited as a conspiracy or dismissed as inaccurate. From what I've gleaned through extensive historical immersion, the ancient Aryan culture of the ancient Frisians once wielded significant influence globally in antiquity. This enigmatic culture is believed to originate from the north, in a region referred to as Hyperborea, where ancient Mercator maps depict a sizable island known as Friesland. Mainstream history labels this island as a phantom creation, yet we have refuted this claim, finding the captivating history of this once potent civilization preserved in the Oer Linda book. This book serves as a generational chronicle passed down among a people, containing texts that stretch far back into human history. Despite enduring controversy, particularly during World War II when the Nazis displayed interest in it, the book has since been maligned as anti-Semitic propaganda. However, it is crucial to recognize that this notion is unfounded. Allow me to present several significant examples of this overlooked and enthralling Dutch history. Quote, next to Alkmaar, just over 1,000 paces away, fields known as Verona speak of the once prosperous, bustling, and populous city, formerly the sole trading center amidst the minority of the Frisians. However, now only faint traces of its wealth remain, and the city's burial mounds are often displayed, presumably constructed from rubble, preserving the memory of that name to this day. The northern part between Coeticum and the extensive Langeticum is called Veronese Fields, as mentioned earlier, comprising the most fertile wheat fields, touched by the village of Pancratio. It is likely that this was the head of the small Frisians, the source of war and fury due to its advantageous position for attacks on Holland. And thus, due to numerous breaches of trust and repeated rebellions, it was completely destroyed and devastated by Count Jan Han Anio, who even ordered it not to be rebuilt and the land to be plowed, according to the chronicles. It seems he wanted to erase the memory of that name through eternal oblivion, harboring such indelible hatred towards them that he even enlisted British troops for the destruction of the flourishing city, subsequently exposing them to the wrath of that nation after the city's access was made public through the betrayal of Consul Phoebe. What the ancient Frisians once said, from the north of the Arctic and the shores of the sea, then Verona was your capital, now a plain and fields. If the Frisians ever wage war, Verona was the leader and the greatest pride of that people. Why the chronicles remain silent on this subject and only dedicate 1 or 2 words to it, as if a fleeting mention were sufficient, I do not know, unless it was perhaps done out of ignorance or hostility towards the city, whose memory they may have wanted to silently erase. But the well-known half-verse attests to the downfall. Behold, the mother of Friesland has fallen, end quote. The rationale behind discrediting these claims remains unclear to me, as my sources consist solely of personal experiences and credible testimonies regarding these matters. Consequently, the question arises, how should we interpret history precisely, and when did these events occur? The Tower of Babel was a mythical structure from the Hebrew Bible. According to the story in Genesis 11 verses 1 to 9, the tower was constructed by people who lived in the plain of Shinar after the flood. They aimed to build a tower that reached the heavens, but God caused a confusion of languages and scattered the people across the earth. The city where the tower stood was named Babel, meaning confusion. The exact date of the construction of the Tower of Babel is unknown, but some sources associate it with the Ziggurat Etemenanke, a tower temple in Babylon dedicated to the god Marduk. This temple was built and rebuilt multiple times by various Babylonian kings, including Nebuchadnezzar II, r. 605 to 562 BCE, and Alexander the Great, r. 336 to 323 BCE. The foundations of this temple were excavated in the early 20th century by the German archaeologist Robert Koldewey. This tower, along with the city, was said to have a wall around it measuring 25 miles, according to the people of that land. Despite being known as the Tower of Babylon, it contained many well-organized dwellings inside, spacious and vast. The tower covered a large area of land around it, measuring approximately 10 miles square. It was built by King Nimrod, the ruler of that land and the first king of the world. This king had an image made in likeness of his father and compelled all his subjects to worship it. Others followed suit, thus beginning the proliferation of idols in the world. The Great Babylon does not fall under the dominion of the Sultan, but under the Emperor of Persia, yet it acknowledges the authority of the Great Khan, who rules over Cathay. The Great Khan is the supreme emperor and sovereign of all overseas territories. He reigns over the islands of Cathay and numerous others, extending into parts of India, with his land bordering that of Pope John. He possesses so much land under his rule that its extent is unknown. He is more powerful and greater than the Sultan. Baghdad serves as the principal city of the Chaldean land and kingdom. Tarragona, built by Dido who came from Troy, is the chief city of Africa, and later she became Queen of Italy. Quote, "The Beamers, like other mortal humans, claim that their origin is very ancient and dates back to distant times. They claim to descend from the Slavs and further assert that the Slavs were among those who built the Tower of Babel after the flood, where the multitude of languages began, hence they were called Slavs, which means they had many words, and from there they came to Europe and took over the lands they inhabited. Similarly, many Germans who consider themselves very noble claim to descend from the Romans, and it is also said that the Romans descend from the Trojans, and they pride themselves on that. Likewise, the French and Franks living in Germany claim to descend from the Trojans, as do the Britons or English, who descend from Brutus, a Trojan. But the Beamers trace their beginning and origin much further back, to the Slavs who built the Tower of Babel. However, they do not tell who their kings, lords, and princes were, or which land they inhabited, or when they came to Europe, but only that there were Slavs who first possessed that land. Similarly, the Dutch also claimed to descend from Bretagne or England, and took possession of these lands of Holland and Zeeland, and also called themselves Slavs." End quote. The slaves, referred to as giants, represent our true human ancestors in the ancient form of the Frisians/Aryans. These beings hailed from Scythia, also known historically as the Khatan or Kathi, and are the kin or descendants of the original tribes chronicled in the Oer Linda book. On the other hand, I observed that historical India, like historical Greece, suddenly emerges around 609 BC in the pages of Buddhist literature and in the epic Mahabharata, with a multitude of Aryan rulers speaking the Aryan language, featuring a fully developed Aryan civilization of exactly the same general type that has persisted to this day. This raised the question, where did these Aryan invaders suddenly come from in India around the 7th century BC, with their fully developed Aryan civilization, in a previously uncivilized land? By analyzing this early Aryan civilization introduced suddenly in India, concerning culture, social structure, customs, folklore, and religion, and the traditional topography and climate of their ancestral homeland as described in the Vedas, descriptions that were utterly irrelevant to India, I was led by numerous clues to trace these Aryan, or as they called themselves, Arya, invaders of India back to Asia Minor and Syria Phoenicia. I then noted that the ancient ruling race of Asia Minor and Syria Phoenicia, from time immemorial, were the great imperial, highly civilized, ancient people generally known as Hittites, but who called themselves Kadi or Kati, the same title by which the early British kings of the pre-Roman period called themselves and their race, and stamped this on their British coins, the so-called Kati coins of early Great Britain. And the early ruling race of Aryans who first civilized India also called themselves Katiyo. This ancient Kati, or Kati, ruling class of Asia Minor and Syrian Phoenicia also called themselves Ari, with the meaning of nobles. This was exactly the same racial title also used by the Indo-Aryans or the eastern branch of the Aryans, who called themselves Arya, the Arya, of the older Pali, which also had the literal meaning of noble. This is the actual word from which our modern English term, Aryan, originated. And these ancient Kati or Hittites are depicted in their ancient sculptures in Gothic attire. Here, I seem to have not only found the origin of the Indo-Aryans, but also the original land of the Aryan race, and the homeland of the Goths, and our own ancestral Britons and Anglo-Saxons. And further research soon confirmed this. The civilization of this Ari, or Aryan, race of Kati or Kati, was essentially of the type now called the Aryan typology, and of the same type as that introduced in India by the eastern branch of the Aryans or Aryans. Also in appearance, these Kati, called the White Syrians by Strabo, seen in their own rock carvings and sculpted monuments between 300 and 2000 BC, belonged to the Aryan type. They were tall in stature with conical Phrygian caps and snow boots with curled toes, and dressed prominently in what is now often called the Gothic style of clothing, for the reason, as we will later see, that they were the primitive Goths and the Goths were typically Aryan in race. The Frisiorum Antiquity of 1590, translated from Latin, quote, "Here I have described how Brutus and his companion Corinus came to the island of Albion as Trojans and found many giants and titans there, who according to some chronicles had come from Assyria, and named the island Albion." All writers of British affairs unanimously agree on the story of Brutus, who gave his name to Britannia, hitherto known as Albion, and drove out the giants called slaves from that island. They tell that these expelled ones, seeking new places to settle, arrived on the coasts of Lower Saxony, now called Friesland. Later, when the Frisians returned to England with the Slavs and did not know what to do, they entered the wild forest together mercilessly in the Netherlands. They drove out the wild beasts there and built a fortress where Leiden now stands. They placed a castle lord there with many people to guard the forest. Many children were born from this castle lord, including a son named Lem. He was a man of importance, so the savages chose him as the Lord of Wiltenberg. This Lord Lem had a son named Dibout, who later became king of Friesland. He had a wife who was a giantess, with whom he had many children, including a son named Lem. This Lem became a knight and founded the city of Haarlem, named after him. From this Lord Lem, the mighty King Ezelor was born. This King Ezelor was so named because his ears were as long as those of a donkey. He was also very large. He had a wife who was also a giantess, with whom he had many children, including a daughter, who later became Queen of Friesland. King Ezelor was the king of the Slavs, who are now called Hollanders. King Ezelor built a very large castle near Voorburg, so large that no comparison could be found in terms of size or height. King Ezelor lived for a very long time, and from him came a bastard named Vok. He was named so because his eyes were as round and clear as those of a falcon. This Vok built a large castle on the north side of the forest and named it Valkenburg. In this way, the land of Holland was inhabited for the first time, but this people were still heathens for more than 150 years. End quote. Quote Oerlinda book. I will inform you how it went with the Slavonic peoples, from which you may learn. The foreign kings, who live as they please, challenge Ralda. Out of envy that Ralda is called Alvidar, they also wanted to be called fathers of the peoples. When the kings had brought it so far that they were called fathers of the peoples, they went away, and had statues made in their likeness. These statues they had placed in the churches next to the idols, and those who would not bow down to them were killed or put in chains. Your ancestors and the people of Twiskland have associated with the foreign kings, from whom they learned this folly. End quote. Why the Emperor of Cathay is called the Great Khan. You must know that when the world was destroyed by the flood, along with Noah, his wife, and their children, Noah had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Ham was the one who saw his father naked while he was drunkenly sleeping and pointed and mocked him, therefore he was cursed, and Japheth turned around and covered his father. These 3 brothers divided the land among themselves, and Ham, because he was the cruelest and most violent, took the largest portion of the lands and the best part, and the part of the east that is called Asia, and Shem took Africa, and Japheth took Europe, and therefore the world is divided into 3 parts. Of these 3 brothers, Ham was the greatest and most powerful, from him came more descendants than from the others. And from his son Nimrod was born, the giant, who was the first king of the whole world, who began building the Tower of Babylon. And with him and with the women of his lineage often came the enemies of hell, and begot children of many wondrous kind, some without heads, others with large ears, others with 1 eye, others with horse hoofs, others with other unformed limbs, so that from the lineage of Ham have sprung the wondrous people who inhabit the islands across the sea, of which I have spoken above, throughout all Asia. And because he was so powerful and no one could resist him, he called himself the Son of God and the supreme ruler of the whole world. And because of Ham, all emperors have called themselves the Great Khan, and the Son of God by nature, and the supreme ruler of the whole world, and so they write to him in their letters. And from the lineage of Shem came the Saracens, and from the lineage of Japheth came the people of Israel, and we and the others who live in Europe, as those from Syria, and those from Samaria claim, and they told me so before I departed for India. But when I arrived in India, everything turned out to be different. However, it is true that those of Tartary and those who live in the vast Asia descend from Ham, but the emperor of Cathay is not called Ham but Khan. And I will tell you why. It is more than 8 times 20 years ago that all Tartary was subordinate, and in servitude to the other countries around it. For they were all animalistic and did nothing but tend to cattle and lead them to pasture. But among them were 5 important lineages, which were the highest of them all, of which the first lineage was called Tartar. And from this lineage, the whole land was named Tartary because they were the noblest and most praised. The second lineage was called Kangath, the third Urak, the fourth Valir, the fifth Seniath, the sixth Mungi, the seventh was called Tabak. About that land of Pigman, where small people live, only 3 spans long and different. From there one continues and returns to the land of the great Khan. This river flows through the land of Pingwarden, inhabited by small people who are only 3 spans long, yet beautiful and graceful, men and women alike in their diminutive stature. They marry when they are half a year old and live only 6 or 7 years. And if they live to be 8 years old, they are considered very old. These small people are the finest craftsmen and most skilled in silk, cotton, and all other things made there that can be found in the world, and often wage wars against the birds of that land which catch and eat them. These small people neither plow nor cultivate the land nor plant vineyards, but among them live large people like us, who till the land as it should be. And these small people mock the large, as we would do, if they were among us. There stands a good city among all others where many of these small people live. And this city is very beautiful and large. And the large people who live among them, when they have children, they are as small as the Pingwarden. And that is why they are so small, for the nature of that land is so. The great Khan ensures that this city is well guarded, for it is his own. They embody the authentic essence and character of our planet, and our human existence. Our consciousness emanates from the physical monopole at the core of our world, inherently connected to divine consciousness or existence. As a fragment of God's consciousness, we possess the capacity to materialize the entire physical world. Quote, the Arctic region is also home to the Garden of Eden, as mentioned in Genesis. Eden is located directly beneath Mount Zion. There is also a class of great angels who reside there in a grand city, along with large animals such as the woolly mammoth. All of this still exists to this day, guarded by a flaming sword as mentioned in Genesis 3 verse 24, so he drove out the men, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims, and a flaming sword which turned every way, to keep the way of the tree of life. The North Pole is situated exactly at the center of our flat earth, so the Garden of Eden and Mount Zion are literally the center of the earth. Let's start with Eden and what the Bible says. Genesis 2 verse 10 states, and a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted, and became into 4 heads. The names of the 4 rivers are Pison, Gin, Hiddekel, and Euphrates. The Garden of Eden is located underground, directly beneath Mount Zion, and the river that flows out of Eden goes upward and outward, splitting into those 4 rivers, all of which are situated at the North Pole. There has been a worldwide great flood. As it had gone with our Bergt, so had it gone with the others. In the high lands they were destroyed by the earth, and in the low lands by the water. Only Friesbercht on Texeland was found unharmed. The people who returned all settled within the ring dikes of the Bergt, as outside it was all silt and marshland. The old houses were rebuilt together. Cows and sheep were bought from the upper lands, and in the large houses where previously the maidens resided, cloth and felt were now made, for the sake of life. This happened 1888 years after Atlant had sunk. In 282 years, we had not had an Irremutter, and now, when everything seemed almost lost, one was chosen. The lot fell on Gosa, also called Makanta. She was Bergmagd at Friesbergt on Texeland. Clear-headed and wise, very good, and because her Bergt alone was spared, everyone saw her calling. The Hindu Makanta, Crown of Heroes. Paradise Found, The Cradle of the Human Race at the North Pole by William F. Warren. The Hereford map of the world, dating back to the 13th century, depicts the favored place as a circular island east of India and separated from the mainland not only by the sea, but also by a tilting wall with one gate to the west, through which our first parents were supposed to have been expelled. Hugo de Saint Victor wrote, "Paradise is a place in the east containing all kinds of forests and palms. It contains the tree of life. There is neither cold nor heat there, but a constant, even temperature. It contains a fountain that pours into 4 rivers." Thus, Dietz describes in a 13th-century poem the earthly paradise as located in an inaccessible region in Asia, surrounded by flames and guarded at its only gate by an armed angel. That place of darkness extends from this coast to the earthly paradise where Adam, our first father, and Eve were placed, who stayed there only a short time, and that is to the east at the beginning of the earth of paradise. As wise men say, the highest place of the earth is, and it is so high that it almost touches the circle of the moon, where the moon makes its revolution. For it is so high that the flood of Noah could not reach it, which would have covered all the earth of the world, everything around it and above and below, except paradise, and this paradise is entirely surrounded by a wall, and people do not know what it is made of, for the wall is entirely covered with moss as it appears, and it does not seem that the wall is made of natural stone, and that wall extends from the south to the north, and it has only one entrance, which is closed with burning fire, so that no mortal man ventures to enter, and at the highest place of paradise, exactly in the middle, is a well that throws out 4 streams, which run through different lands, of which the first Pan or Ganges is called, which runs through all India, or Mlak, in which river are many precious stones and much lignum aloes and much sand of gold, and the other river is called the Nile or Ghan, which runs through Ethiopia and then through Egypt, and the other is called Tigris, which runs through Assyria and through Great Armenia, and the other is called Euphrates, which runs through Media, Armenia and Persia, and people outside say that all the sweet water of the world is above and below it. Surrounding the earth is a vast sea called the ocean. And what lies to the south of the earth? Eric, the Red, asked. Oh, there lies the end of the world, and that is India. And pray, where can I find the land without death, which is supposed to be the paradise? Well, it lies slightly to the east of India. Then, after reaching India, they continued their journey on horseback until they reached a dense forest, whose darkness was so great due to the intertwining of the branches that even in daylight, the stars could be seen twinkling as if viewed from the bottom of a well. As the Celtic earthly paradise Avalon was an island surrounded by sea in the northern waters, it could naturally only be reached by ship. The first to accomplish this feat, as far as Christian legend informs us, was Saint Brandon, son of Fogo, a famous saint of the Irish Church, who died in 576 or 577. And know that the people who travel there come from Genoa, Venice, Lombardy, or Rome. They must travel up to 11 or 12 months or more over land and sea before they can reach the land of Cathay, which is the most important and largest land of all others on that side of the sea, and belongs to the Great Khan. From a city called Caden stands the palace of the Great Khan. From Cathay, you travel east for many days, so that among many other cities, you eventually reach a city called Sugramago, which is a well-fortified city, and is supplied with silk, spices, and many other goods than any other city in the world. Then you continue traveling eastward to another city, which is ancient and lies in the province of Cathay. And at this city, the people of Tartary have built another city, called Caden, which has 12 gates, and between each gate is a great mile, so that the 2 cities, the old and the new, together enclose 20 miles or more. In this city is the seat or court of the Great Khan, which is a very large and beautiful palace, whose wall is 2 miles around, and within this palace are many other palaces. And within the orchard of the great palace stands a mountain, on which stands another palace, which is the most beautiful, richest, and fairest that one could visit. And around the palace and that mountain are many trees bearing all kinds of fruits, and around that mountain are large deep trenches full of water. And alongside those are large deep fires on both sides, and there stands a beautiful bridge, where one crosses the ditch to the palace. Ora Linda Book. Pangab, meaning 5 waters, is where we come from, and it's a river of exceptional beauty, named 5 waters because 4 other rivers flow into the sea through its mouth. Far to the east lies another great river called the Holy, or Devout Ganges. Between these 2 rivers lies the land of the Hindus. Both rivers flow down from the high mountains to the lowlands. The mountains from which they flow are so high that they reach the heavens, Laya, hence the mountain range is called the Himalaya Mountains. Among the Hindus and others from those lands, there are some people who gather in secret. They believe that they are the pure descendants of Finda. They believe that Finda was born from the Himalaya Mountains, from where she migrated with her children to the delta or lowlands. Some among them believe that they descended with their children on the foam of the holy Ganges. Therefore, that river would be called the Holy Ganges. However, the priests who come from another land had these people traced and burned, therefore, they dare not openly advocate for their cause. In this land, all priests are wealthy and corpulent. In their temples, all sorts of monstrous images are found, including many made of gold. West of Panjab are the Uren, Iranians, or rigid ones, Drangianians, the Gedrasan, Gedrosians, or deserters, and the Urjetan, Orits, or forgotten ones. All these names were given to them by the jealous priests, because they shunned them because of their customs and beliefs. When our ancestors arrived, they also settled on the eastern bank of the Panjab, but because of the priests, they also sailed to the western bank. Thus we came to know the Uren and others. The Uren are not savages but good people who do not allow or worship idols, nor do they tolerate temples or priests. Like us, who adhere to the sacred light of Fasta, they keep fire burning in their homes everywhere. End quote. It is more than 8 times 20 years ago that all of Tartary was subjugated and enslaved to the other surrounding lands. For they were all bestial and did nothing but herd cattle and lead them to pasture. But among them were 5 important lineages, the highest of them all, of which the first lineage was called Tartar. And from this lineage the entire land was named Tartary because they were the noblest and most praised. The second lineage was called Kangath, the third Urak, the fourth Valir, the fifth Seniath, the sixth Mungi, and the seventh was called Tabak. From there, one goes further and returns to the land of the Great Khan. This river flows through the land of Pingwarden, inhabited by small people who are only 3 spans tall. From the descendants of Japheth, who primarily inhabited Europe. Just as the children of Ham sought their dwelling places to the south, and those of Shem to the east, so Japheth, the third son of Noah, settled in the west and north of the world. He is called our father, says Carrion, and therefore you find his name among the poets, who call him Japhedim. Josephus writes that he had 7 sons. The territory they possessed extended from the Taurus and Amanus mountains into Asia, and from the river Tanais in Europe to the lands of Gades. These lands, which were previously empty, they took possession of. From his son Javan or Jayan descend the ancient Greeks, called Jones. Carrion thinks that the word Javan or Jayan is the name of Janus, although some attribute it to Noah. This Janus was depicted by the Romans with 2 faces, because he was the father of 2 peoples, namely the Greeks and the Latins. They also honored him especially, consulting him when they wanted to undertake something, to show that they considered him their father. Others give him 2 faces because he considered the beginning and end of the year. Ora Linda. Minno was an ancient sea king, a seer, and philosopher. He gave laws to the Cretans. He was born at the Linderorden. From Minno's writings. When Nehelenia, also called Minerva by her own name, was well established, and the Cretans loved her almost as much as our own people, then some princes and priests came to her castle and asked Minerva where her estates were located. Helenia answered, I carry my estates in my bosom, what I have inherited is love of wisdom, justice, and freedom. If I lose that, then I am like the least of your slaves. Now I do not give advice, but then I would sell it. The lords left, calling out laughing, your obedient servants, wise Helenia. But they missed their mark with that, because the people who loved and followed her took this name as an honor. When I thus sailed away with my people from Athenia, we at last came to an island, called by my men Crete, because of the wild cries the people raised at our coming. However, when they saw that we did not intend war, they became docile, so that I finally traded a boat with iron tools for a harbor mouth and a piece of land, but when we had sat there for a while, and they noticed that we had no slaves, then they were amazed by it. But when I told them that we had laws to administer equal justice to all, then the people wanted such too, but hardly had they obtained them, or the whole country became chaotic. The princes and priests came and pretended that we had made their subjects rebellious, and the people came to us for help and protection. But when the princes saw that they would lose their kingdom, they granted freedom to the people and came to me for an assegabok. But the people were not accustomed to freedom, and the lords continued to rule as they saw fit. After that storm was over, they began to sow discord between us. They told my people that I had called for their help to become king permanently. Once I found poison in my food. But when a ship from Flyland happened to sail to us, I quietly departed with it. But leaving my own experiences aside, with this story alone I want to say that we should not get involved with Finda's people, wherever they may be, because they are as full of false vines as their sweet wines are of death. These are the scriptures of Helenia. I have placed them at the forefront because they are the most ancient. Hail to all true Frisians. In ancient times, the Slavonic peoples knew not of freedom. Like oxen, they were brought under the yoke. They were driven into the bowels of the earth to mine metals, and from the hard mountains, they were compelled to build houses, fit for princes and priests. Everything they did served not to satisfy themselves, but to enrich and empower the rulers and priests further. Through this toil, they grew gray and stiff before their time, perishing without joy, despite the earth providing abundantly for all her children. Yet our runaways and exiles came through Twiskland into their territories, and our sailors entered their harbors. From them they heard of equal freedom and justice, and of laws that none can be outside. All of this was absorbed by the sorrowful people like dew by dry fields. When they were full of it, the boldest began to clash their chains, causing distress to the rulers. The rulers, proud and warlike, still retained some virtue in their hearts. They counseled together and shared some of their abundance. But the cowardly, hypocritical priests could not tolerate that, among their false gods, they had also created wicked and cruel monsters. The plague came upon the land, and they said the gods were angry over the disobedience of the wicked. Then the boldest people with their chains were strangled. The earth drank their blood, and with that blood, she nourished fruits and grains, and all who ate from them became wise. 1600 years ago, Atlan sank, and at that time, 2298 BC, something unexpected happened. In the heart of Find Asland on the mountain, lies a plain called Casimir, meaning rare. There a child was born, his mother was the daughter of a king, and his father was a high priest. To avoid shame, they had to disown their own blood. Therefore, it was taken outside the city to poor people. His first name was Jessos, but the priests, who hated him greatly, called him Fo shame, which means false. The people called him Krishna, which means shepherd, and his Frisian friend called him Buddha, satchel, because he had a treasure of wisdom in his head and a treasure of love in his heart. Eventually, he had to flee because of the priest's vengeance. But wherever he went, his teachings preceded him, and wherever he went, his enemies followed him like his shadow. After traveling for 12 years, Jessos died, but his friends preserved his teachings and proclaimed them wherever they found ears to listen. What do you think the priests did then? I must inform you of it. You must pay close attention to it and guard against their deeds and machinations with all the strength that Ralda has placed within you. As Jessos's teachings spread across the earth, the false priests went to his birthplace to announce his death. They claimed to be his friends. They feigned great sorrow by tearing their clothes and shaving their heads. They went to live in the caves of the mountains, but within these, they had brought their treasures, and there they made statues of Jessos. These statues they gave to the unsuspecting people. At last, they said that Jessos was a deity, that he himself had confessed this to them, and that all who believed in him and his teachings would come to his kingdom in the hereafter, where there is joy and delights. Knowing that Jessos had opposed the rich, they proclaimed everywhere that poverty, suffering, and simplicity were the keys to entering his kingdom, that those who had suffered the most on earth would have the most joy there in the afterlife. Although they knew that Jessos had taught that one must overcome and control their passions, they taught that one must kill all their passions, and that the perfection of a person consisted in becoming as emotionless as a cold stone. In order to convince the people that they themselves did so, they feigned poverty in the streets, and to further prove that they had killed all their sensual desires, they took no wives. However, if a young girl had made a mistake anywhere, she was quickly forgiven. They said the weak must be helped, and to save one's own soul, one must give much to the church. Thus they had wives and children without a household, and they became rich without working, but the people became much poorer and more miserable than ever before. This teaching, wherein the priests need no other knowledge than to reason deceitfully, maintain a pious facade, and commit injustices, spread itself from east to west, and will also come to our land. But when the priests think they have extinguished all the light of Freya and Jesos's teachings, then there will arise in every corner people who have secretly preserved and hidden the truth among themselves. These will be of royal blood, of priestly blood, of Slavonic blood, and of Freya's blood. They will bring their lamps and the light outside, so that everyone may see the truth. They will lament over the deeds of the priests and rulers. The rulers who love the truth and justice will turn away from the priests. Blood will flow, but from it, the people will gather new strength. Finda's people will employ their ingenuity for the common good, and Lyda's people their strength, and we our wisdom. Then the false priests will be wiped from the earth, Ralda's spirit will be honored and invoked everywhere, the laws that Ralda placed at the beginning in our hearts will be heard only, there will be no other masters, nor rulers, nor bosses, except those chosen by common will. Then Freya will rejoice, and Eartha will give her gifts only to the workingmen. All this will begin 4,000 years after Atlan sank, and 1,000 years later, there will be no more priests or coercion on earth. Helenia, also known as Della, watch over us.